party, David got on stage and he raised his hand. He goes, "Okay, be honest now. How many of you are having the time of your lives?" And they start giggling. I'm going, "What's that about?" He goes, "Oh boy, I know I am." He said, "This is more fun than an adult ought to have." and and now they're screaming. And I'm
Right.
going, I'm missing something. There wasn't a joke there. And then it hit me. It was his attitude. He was saying what we were feeling and we related to it. And that really had a big impact on me. I wanted to do something with my art that had that kind of, that communication, that humor, that resonance. And it's one of the reasons I got into the cartooning. To say that I wasn't going to comment or wasn't wanting to do political things or anything like that. I just want to say that life's not so bad. We shouldn't take ourselves so seriously. Lighten up, which is basically what David was saying. And I felt that I could do it with my art. And so that's how I created Garfield. I actually, out of college, got a job as an assistant to T.K. Ryan on the Tumbleweeds comic strip. Did his inking, borders, balloons, answered his fan mail. And so during that time, I got the discipline of hand. But I found I didn't, answering his fan mail, I didn't want to work with human characters particularly because everything he did or said, somebody was taking offense, particularly these days, but not with the animals. You could do anything with an animal. I thought, dogs were doing well. Snoopy, Marmaduke, Fred Bassett, Belvedere, Daisy, and Blondie. So I thought, nobody was really doing cats. So I thought I can do a cat. I grew up on a farm with 25 of them. And so that's how I got into Garfield and why I wanted to do this.
But there's an interesting sort of backstory to that as well. You were telling me that you and James Dean had the same acting teacher,
Mhm.
and you were telling me about the fact that talking about sort of the aspects of a cat and what made and what James Dean brought to his acting were sort of similar to that of a cat. I'd like for
Yeah.
you to talk a little bit about that because it does sort of seem that tying your life and your work to a cat really sort of made a
Mhm.
lot of sense in a lot of ways.
Well, like I said, I grew up with 25 of them or so on the farm. They were used them for mousers, and they were great at controlling rodents. But they were, I was very close to them. They're mystical. There's something, very smooth, very cool about a cat. And I did. I went to Fairmount High School where James Dean had gone to school, and I had his same drama coach. And she told me that when James was on Broadway, he would get he'd be backstage and he would do this and he said he'd emulate his cats on his farm, which were right outside of Fairmount. He said because a cat appears to be very relaxed on the outside, but inside was very tense and wound very tight. And he wanted to keep that kind of energy, but on the outside have that kind of relaxation and presence for his acting. And and for me, cats too. Also, I could do anthropomorphic kind of gags with cats that maybe you couldn't do with a lot of others. People naturally attribute human thoughts and feelings to cats. When you talk to your cat like he understands you, it's like, and so I thought I could get away with that. And I too had more latitude working with an animal, as opposed to a human, because they're not necessarily a particular age, sex, or race, or anything like that. And so I can move around a lot with the jokes. But so it's cartoonists are very close to stage in that we're the writers, we're the directors, we're the choreographers, we set the stage, we write the script, and we do all of that. It's just that as opposed to acting, as opposed to like stand-up comedy, I get to think of one funny thing all day. I don't have to do a whole line of gags. So for me, it's a lot easier.
But I have to say, coming up with that one thing a day,
Mhm.
every day for decades and decades, I assume that that is still to this day a little intimidating, right?
I thought so until I met Mort Walker,
No.
who did Beetle Bailey. And he invited me up to the studio. I went to New York City. I signed the contract to become a syndicated cartoonist. And I'd written to him. I went up to the studio and I said, now I have to write lots of gags. He said, hold it. He said, when I got started, he said, I thought, you know, it would be tough. It'd get tougher to write. He says, as it turns out, he said, for me, he said, writing gags is like walking into a dark closet and pulling a gag off the shelf and leaving with it. He said, you don't know how big the closet is, how large the pantry is. He said, as it turns out, it's infinite. He said, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And for me, the more I got to know Garfield and the other characters, the easier it gets. So Garfield's writing his own material these days. You know, I sit back, put him in a situation, and I watch him. When he does something funny, I back up 3 frames and cut it off. And it's that simple. I'm confident in my ability to assess when I hear a gag when he does something. I think that's going to make a lot of people laugh. So I edit.
Right. Well, see that I think that's a fascinating discussion, and it goes to it sort of reminds me of the discussion a lot of actors have who are, for instance, on long-running TV shows, that
Uh,
they get to know their characters better and they stop saying somebody else's words and then they start saying their own words in that character's point of view and perspective.
sure.
And I assume that that's what happened for you.
Absolutely. Oh, they do. Yeah. You play with it. And I watch the fan mail too. And some characters would get a lot of mail. Some would get none. Sometimes I'd introduce a character and then watch the fan mail. And so that was for me a great sounding board for what was resonating with the readers and what wasn't. So.
So did fans kind of help inform, at least early on, kind of what Garfield was about and how you approached him and the other characters?
And editors. And as the syndicate salesman, we're presenting Garfield to papers and talking to editors about what they felt was working, because they work with a lot of strips and they get a lot of mail themselves. So I relied on a lot of feedback and because I wanted to create something that spoke to a lot of people. And also in the interest of being international, I don't do any political kind of gags or plays on words or puns in the interest of making Garfield more easily translatable. He's in 28 languages. And so that helped a lot as well. And also forced me to do the kind of humor that was very, very broad, that I wanted to do something that left you feeling better after you laughed than before. Not a shock gag or, you know, any kind of a gag like that, but a good feeling kind of gag.
Well, that's interesting. And you and I talked a little bit about this recently about the fact that obviously there's no social commentary, that's not about
Mhm.
politics. And that certainly helps make Garfield far more universal and certainly long lasting. No one is ever going to look back at a Garfield strip and there's not going to be a pop culture reference that necessarily dates Garfield. In the
Mhm.
same way that, Snoopy and Beetle Bailey and so forth, and certainly Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered, has it been difficult for you to hold that back, or is it just so easy and natural and effortless for you to just make that gag, that thing that makes people feel good? You and I talked about the fact
Yeah.
that countless kids, you've heard from countless kids over the years who had a horrible day and
Mhm.
took a collection of Garfield into a dark room and read it till they felt better.
Yeah.
I think and obviously that's not something that can be accomplished if you were doing political or satirical or social commentary.
No, actually traveling on a book tour, sometimes it's interesting to see the kind of lines that line up for different kinds of authors. The Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock, nice guy, had to travel with a bodyguard. And he goes, look at your line, they're all smiling and happy, you know. But and oh, okay, I've never told this story before. I had dinner with the guy who was doing Darth Vader. Okay. And he said, well, your book signing, has anyone ever tried to take your life? Like, let me think. No. And I said, he said, a couple of people come at him with like a big sword, you know, because he was Darth Vader, you know. And I asked him, what do you do? He said, I take the helmet off. I take the voice synthesizer off. And he said, I get as far away from Darth as I can. Then they wander off. And so you get the kind of following, you create the kind of culture based on the kind of work that you do. And for me, the nicest thing I can hear is that Garfield makes me smile. Garfield made my day, made me feel better. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
I assume that the closest your life has ever come to being in peril is some child hugging you just a little too hard.
That, you know, been nipped by a couple of cats. Outside of that, I'm fine.
Somebody, let's. I'll get to a question here. I don't want to hog all of it, but I could easily. Ari asks, "What inspired you to change the look of Garfield from his early appearance to his later appearance?"
That was never intentional. That just kind of happened over time to allow Garfield to do the things he needed to do to better reach up high on a high shelf or to better move around. The newspaper strips got smaller in 1983 with the newsprint shortage. I had to make the eyes bigger and the mouth bigger to get the expressions big, literally big enough so older readers could literally see. I made the lettering larger too, because a lot of papers were shrinking the strips almost out of sight and I was
Right.
losing the expression of the characters. Now, I was working on Garfield's first TV special at Bill Melendez's studio in Hollywood. And I was doing storyboards and I wanted Garfield to get up and dance in the opening credits. And we were going to rotoscope a dancer and do Garfield over it, but he had to stand up on his back 2 feet in order to do it. And I was having a terrible time with it because he had these tiny little feet and this big round body. And I, believe it or not, in the next room working on a Peanuts special was Charles Schulz. He was down working on some concept stuff on a script because Bill Melendez produced all of the Peanuts specials.
Right.
And he asked me, he said, "How's it going?" I said, "Really good, except for the opening credits." I said, "I can't get Garfield to stand up and look good." And he said, "Well, here's your problem." He grabbed my paper. I'm going, "Ugh." He's drawing over my sketch. And he said, when Snoopy is on all fours, he has little puppy feet. But when he stands up, his back feet get bigger, giving him better balance. And nobody ever notices that, but he looks good standing up as well. So he drew these big cat feet with Garfield standing up, and all of a sudden Garfield was balanced. It worked well. And so I raced home and some of the art staff were there. I said, "We're changing everything." I said, "Garfield's going to stand up and walk on 2 feet now because he's got big feet." And from that day on, he walked, and it was thanks to Charles Schulz. And so outside of that, really, I've always done everything to make Garfield a better actor and to make him better animated for what he had to do to serve a gag.
I love the fact that Charles Schultz solved that problem for you, because now all I see in my head is the comparison between the way Snoopy behaved in the Charlie Brown animated specials, especially Charlie Brown Christmas, and Garfield in the animated specials.
When Charlie Brown's pitching a baseball, he takes off his cap to scratch his head. He does it from the backside because you'll notice the arm on the near side is way too short to reach his head. There's like a lot of little tricks to the animation and stuff.
I hope you kept that. I hope that's something you still have, is the Charles Schultz drawing over your sketch to help you solve your Garfield standing problem.
I do not, I'm afraid. That was something Bill Melendez grabbed as I headed out the door.
Well, Bill Melendez was a very, very smart man. So
He's a great
there's
man.
that. Somebody asks, and I think this is kind of an interesting. Are you surprised by how Garfield? And this is sort of I'm sort of cobbling together a couple of questions here in the Q&A. How Garfield has been appropriated over the years. Certainly, when anything enters the popular culture in the mainstream, they're satirized. They're used in all different sort of appropriations. Is there a use of Garfield that has surprised you or startled you over the years?
One of the more gratifying was Garfield minus Garfield. It was was it Denmark, Norway? Young man started doing a series of strips and he removed Garfield from the strips and it was just John. And all of a sudden, you realize how desperate and lonely John is, how paranoid he is. And someone came to me and said, Jim, he said, this is going on online. And by the way, this guy has more viewers than Garfield.com, our own website. I looked at it, and the first thing that occurred to me, like, oh, I know some strips that'd be even funnier without Garfield in it, because sometimes I have a great gag, but I throw Garfield in it because the strip's named after him, to be honest, and I thought, if I could take him out of this, it'd be really funny. So at any rate, the lawyer, everybody said, okay, we sue him, we get it all. I said, this is funny stuff. I said, plus, it's thought provoking, and he's a fan. I said, that's different. It's not cruel. It's not rude. It's not, it's a fan. And so rather than suing him, we actually went to him with a publishing contract. And we published a book, and saying, gave him credit, gave me credit, because I put strips in it too. And it sold pretty well. But what happened was, the real plus to that was the reaction from the folks on the internet going, wow, Disney, Warner, everybody to date has sued everybody using, anything vaguely close to the image of their characters, and we embraced it. There are so many iterations of Garfield, there's no way we could have possibly followed all of them anyway. We only went after the worst cases, and everything else we basically, just let it go. Just let people have fun with it. And actually, there was an article in the New York Times only about 2 or 3 weeks ago about someone who'd grown up saying, really enjoying all of the iterations of Garfield. They enjoyed that as much as, seeing the strip, what we were doing with it. And it gave them a sense of, at least a sense of security. You feel like you can always go back, in a world that's changing so quickly. Snoopy is always laying on the doghouse. There's some things you can count on. That, in the 50 years Snoopy was around, you learned to read, you went to school, you got married, you had kids, all with that same character laying on the doghouse. And that's a wonderful thing. So at any rate, long answer to a short question. I've been gratified by that, really pleased that, and it's interesting too, to see their take of Garfield and how he responds to things. Some of them are honestly, it's funnier than what I do. It's
Well,
been fun to see.
Did Garfield without Garfield change your perception of what you were doing? I mean, I can't imagine, it becomes, I remember seeing those and falling in love with them because they became way more existential.
Very much so. Yeah.
So did that change how you saw what you were doing and change perhaps how you approached it? Or was it just a thing that you saw and liked and appreciated and understood, but tried not to let that come into your own work?
I didn't let it, no, I didn't let it. The things that come in from the outside, or suggestions people make, or I'm getting ready to release a movie that say, maybe some mention in the strip, might help. I never do that. Nothing from the outside affects that relationship I have with the 3 panels. I'm sure it influences in some way, but not consciously, overtly, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
I go, no, I can't do that because I just read that. That doesn't affect me.
Several people have asked what I think is a really interesting question, which is, are there particular characters in the strip that you feel a special affinity for? Obviously, you love them all, but are there any that are more fun or easier or more difficult for you to write and create for?
One of the more challenging characters is the main one. That's Odie, because he doesn't talk. So I'm removing one whole tool I have for writing. And so as a result, the Odie gags are probably a little more focused, probably a little higher quality, simply because I have to work so hard on them, because all he does is bark. And so I would say that's a tougher one, but I love Odie as much or more than the others because he's the free spirit. He trusts everybody, loves everybody. He's such a good person. But and I created the characters for different reasons, and that humor comes from conflict. If everyone looked alike and agreed with each other, there'd be absolutely no humor whatsoever. So I created, Garfield is very realistic, very down to earth, very outspoken, very much for himself. So in contrast, I created John, the daydreamer, easygoing, always look on the bright side, loves Monday mornings, actually exercises, things like that, so that they could have that kind of play off each other. And then, of course, Odie on the other side, not the sharpest bone in the in the bowl or anything like that. He's a contrast there. So I created the characters out, purposely to let them all play off each other as a result, with the caveat being that they were all to care for each other. Even though cat dog, is a rivalry, nevertheless, it's more of a sibling rivalry than an actual, not hate for each other, but a love-hate kind of thing the siblings might have. And so as long as they cared for one another, and then I didn't let one character win out over another as well. And that was something you notice in let's say a Neil Simon, a Doc Simon play, where he'll get two very strong opinions one way, but he doesn't let one of them win out over the other. So no matter what character you identify with, you feel like you kind of come out of it, in a positive way. So I let all the characters have their moment, some just more than others.
Well, I mean, the precursor to Garfield, the strip that you were doing before Garfield that led to Garfield, you're John. I mean, in a lot
Right.
of ways, I mean, not just because of the human, the cartoonist element. I mean, certainly, I mean, I assume that do you still see John as your stand-in?
I'm John. John with the puffy cheeks and everything. I look on the bright side of everything. And so yeah, I'm an optimist. Glass half full. That's me. So it's there are elements of me and the other characters. You have to write about what you know. I really worked out the personalities of the other characters very carefully and make sure I could relate to them in some way. And so I like to have fun. I like to do silly things, like Garfield, I have maybe less patience with some things, than others and things like that. And well, I don't maybe speak my mind, I think my mind, So Garfield's he's kind of cathartic for me, I guess. And so, yeah, I can identify, with the characters, and obviously with mom and dad. Doc Boy, that's my brother, Doc.
Right.
So I parodied them and used some of the funny things that growing up on the farm, the family stuff. So it's a little bit biographical, but basically I captured their good nature and all the fun we had growing up.
This is a question from Andrew and Olivia. Hi, Jim. I'm here with my 9-year-old daughter, Olivia. We're both very big fans. And we'd like to know, how long does it take to draw a strip, and how far ahead do you plan each storyline?
Okay. The drawing a strip, it depends. If it's in a grocery store, it could take days, but normally I work very simply with just, Garfield and John and a tabletop. And literally it can be penciled up in, 3 hours or something like that, and inked in another, well, it'd probably take about 4 or 5 hours to ink easily. And so the can be done in a day, and
Yeah.
comfortably within a day. And so uh, I work uh, several weeks in advance. Right now I'm just into July, and we're April 1st. And but I like to get strips ahead. If a good Christmas gag comes to mind, I'll go ahead and do it, and I keep it squirreled away, and then pull it out, when I'm ready to do the Christmas gags. Garfield's birthday gags, when I'm having age issues, I go, you know, uh, I'll put something down, I'll save it for Garfield's birthday week or 2 weeks, in June. It's, but I like to work 3 or 4 months in advance. Gives me an opportunity to take a vacation or get sick if I want, or break an arm if that ever happens, you know, so that I have a little bit of lead time at any rate. And because I don't do anything timely as well, that makes it even easier. But
Right.
I'd like to be working a year or so in advance. I'll get there one day.
Wow. You'll get there one day. You've only had about 4 decades, so you better hurry up, Jim.
Okay, okay. I know. I get that from my wife too.
Well, yeah.
One, one day I will though.
So we don't have much time left, and I'm going to get through some
Hmm?
of these questions. I'm going
Okay.
to kind of blend a few together. Somebody asked, "Do you remember certain strips, or do they all blend together?"
Actually, because of the tactile relationship with him, because I
Yeah.
thought of him, I really remember the lion's share of them.
Really?
Occasionally, I'll write a gag and I go, it's kind of close to a gag I did, you know, many years ago, and I'll actually have all of them, and I'll go back and I use a word search thing to kind of check now and then. I hate to repeat because it's happened to me once or twice in 40 some years, so I guess my record's pretty good. But no, I remember them. I do have favorites. They're like children, you know. It's like one of my favorites is Garfield was very depressed. In the first frame, he going, you know, I am down, 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 and and the second frame's down, 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 doobie doo, down, down. Last frame was comma, comma, down, doobie doo, down, down. That didn't translate well, but I got more mail than from that strip than anyone I've ever done.
I have to say I remember that strip very,
Oh
very
my
well
gosh,
for
really?
some reason.
Oh, that was 30 some years ago.
I
Amazing.
Somebody asks, in talking about the strips, I think it's a fascinating discussion because it is such an enormous body of work.
Hmm.
Do you look back at strips, whether you're pulling them for these auctions or just for your own edification, and go, I'd like to revisit that strip. I'd like to do something different. This was a good joke in 1982. I can make it better in 2012,
Virtually
2021.
every, virtually every one of the strips I've ever done. I'd love to go back
Really?
and I could do it again. Ask any artist how happy they are with their work. And you're probably going to find that every artist are their own biggest critics. You know, I'm that way, you know, with the comic strip. I've seen something I go, boy, if I just, you know, no, Jim, it's already been published, let it go.
Well, the
But
person who asked this question prefaced it by saying, "Art is never finished, only abandoned."
boom, that's right. Absolutely right. I got to write that down.
Several people have asked, are there characters over the years that you thought about including but didn't? Do you have, and in as much as certainly you've worked on other strips over the years, you started and stopped other strips during the course of doing Garfield. I assume that there is sort of a life that you'd like, that there are scenarios that are certainly not good for Garfield that may translate to another medium. And I assume that that may be something you've thought about over the years.
um, well, the one character I got rid of, I'm still answering questions about it to this day, is Lyman.
There's a
Um,
question right here for you just about
oh,
Lyman.
the short answer is don't look in John's basement. um, I didn't know how well John would talk to a cat every day. I thought, can I sustain a strip with just a cat, you know, that doesn't speak, so I gave John a roommate. I gave him Lyman, and as it turns out, uh, John and Garfield related so well, and Garfield is so prolific on the gags. I thought Lyman's getting in the way, and so I kind of let him fade out, thinking, well, who's going to notice? But no, you know, early adopting 10-year-old boys are still writing to this day saying, what happened to Lyman? You know, it's 20 years before they were born. And so actually we addressed it, believe it or not, in an episode of the Garfield show. We did it for fun. Um, John and Garfield were they were in Africa, I think it was, and there was some sort of like a Bigfoot kind of character uh, that was terrorizing people in the jungle, and so they went in after him. Well, as it turns out, it was Lyman in a disguise who was chasing off poachers. He was doing good work uh, you know, the wilderness, you know, for, you know, stuff like that. And that's why Lyman wasn't there anymore. He had gone to Africa to do this good work, you know, to save wildlife and the environment and stuff like that. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
It cracks me up that there was literally, I was going to ask about Lyman because somebody had asked about Lyman, and gosh,
Mhm.
it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
The we'll wrap it up with a couple more
Sure.
because and I wanted, and I asked you about this a few weeks ago when we talked just between us. There are several there are a lot of rough drafts and early iterations available in this auction. And I was fascinated by the fact that you would let them out and not much
Mhm.
less, you know, make them available for folks. And you said you really like showing people the process.
Yeah.
What do they take? What do you want them to take from your process of, you know, because certainly we've discussed the process for the last 45 minutes. You've discussed it in many other interviews, but to let people actually see it and study it, what do you hope they take away from it?
Just a glimpse at the kind of, not just the effort that goes into doing a gag, but the progression of a gag and how things go together. It's, for me, I loved watching the old Disney shows and watching the animators together in a room and poring over the storyboards and how they were watching them sculpt the models for the characters and things like that. That to me was almost as fascinating as watching the finished product, to see this great, wonderful story come out and see who helped create it, you know, in the background, because it really is, it takes a village, you know, many times for some of these great animation, you know, works and things like that. And so I've always liked taking like factory tours to see how things are built, you know, and I like watching how it's made. And it's so for me, the process is, it's great fun, and the what you go through for the writing, and then the visualizing, and you know, looking in a mirror and getting the right expressions and stuff like that. The the lines and the words just don't go down on a piece of paper, you know, without, you know, some sort of thought and effort and that magic ingredient, heart, you know. And I've never worked with anyone who was, you know, not, you know, really talented and really good at what they did without them caring about 110% for what they did. And that for me is one of the joys of getting to do a comic strip, is working in the other iterations of Garfield in animation and publishing and things like that, and working with great people that care very much for the end product and care about entertaining the reader. So I think it's fun to give someone a glimpse of what's going on backstage.
Right. Well, Jim, I told you I'd keep you for 45 minutes. We're at 45 minutes, and I know we have a lot of questions, but the fact is, um, I can't tell you how much I enjoy this, and I know everybody on this call did as well.
Thank you,
Um,
Robert.
the auction is April 15th. Bidding is open now. They're all terrific pieces from the team, from the painted pieces, cells from the cartoons, and certainly strips. Many folks are wondering if we can make it searchable by date. I'm sure that that's something we can probably arrange at some point for those who want to buy for anniversaries or for birthdays or births of children and so forth. We'll work all of that out on our end. But Jim, it's a great pleasure, sir, and you know, I can't say anything more than just thank you.
Well, fun visiting with you as always, Robert. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you, everybody. And April 15th, 6 p.m. See you then. Thanks.